Hey, I'm just here creating content that I'd want to watch myself. If you're into real, simple, and honest videos, go ahead and subscribe.
I spent 38 years working as a crisis counselor. I sat with people in the worst moments of their lives. I learned to keep my voice steady when everything inside me was screaming. I learned that panic never saved anyone, but precision did. I thought those skills belonged to my career. I never imagined I would need every single one of them to save my own daughter. I want to tell you what happened. All of it. Because I kept quiet for too long, and silence almost cost me everything. My daughter was 26 when she met him. She called me on a Tuesday evening, and I could hear something different in her voice right away. Not excitement, exactly, more like relief. Like she had been searching for something and finally found it. She told me she had met someone at a work conference. He was in finance. He was kind. He asked her real questions and actually listened to the answers. He made her feel, she said, like the most interesting person in any room. I asked her what he was like with other people. She laughed and said, "Mom, always the counselor." But she answered the question. She said he was generous with waitstaff, patient with strangers, close with his family. She said his father was a deacon at a well-regarded church about 2 hours from where she lived. She said the whole family seemed warm and rooted and good. I told her I was happy for her, and I was. My daughter had spent her 20s throwing herself into her career, working 60-hour weeks, putting her personal life on a shelf she told herself she would get back to later. Seeing her energized, hopeful, a little breathless, it made something in my chest loosen in a way I had not felt in years. They dated for 14 months. He drove 4 hours round trip every weekend to see her. He sent her flowers on the anniversary of the day they met, not just the obvious holidays. He came to my house for Thanksgiving that first year and helped me wash every dish without being asked. And when my sister started telling one of her long, rambling stories at the table, he leaned in like it was the most fascinating thing he had ever heard. I watched him carefully that night. He seemed genuine. I am trained to detect performance. What I saw in him felt real. He proposed on a Sunday morning in my daughter's apartment. She called me before she had even stopped crying. I said yes before she even asked me if I was happy for her. The wedding was simple and beautiful. My daughter wore her grandmother's pearls. His father led a blessing before the meal. He spoke about the covenant of marriage, about a man being a protector and provider, about a woman being a crown to her husband. At the time, I found it old-fashioned but harmless. I smiled. I held my sister's hand. I told myself this was a good day. It was a good day. I hold on to that. Whatever came after, that morning was real. The first thing I noticed was small. So small, I almost talked myself out of noticing it at all. About 4 months after the wedding, my daughter and I had a standing Sunday phone call. We had done it for years. One Sunday she did not call. I called her, and she picked up after the 7th ring, a little breathless, and said she had forgotten, and they had been busy with a thing his father had organized. I said, "No problem, of course. Call me when you can." She called back 3 days later, and we talked for an hour, and everything seemed fine. But the next Sunday she did not call again, and the Sunday after that. When I finally reached her, she sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I asked if she was okay. She said she was wonderful. She used that word specifically, wonderful, and something about the way she said it, too clean, too immediate, no texture, put a small, cold stone in the bottom of my stomach. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself I had spent 4 decades sitting with people in pain, and I was now so accustomed to looking for trouble that I was manufacturing it in my own family. I told myself my daughter was a grown woman, newly married, building a new life, and she did not need her mother reading subtext into a single word. I told myself a lot of things over the next year. I noticed that when I suggested visiting, there was always a reason it was not quite the right time. His father was coming that weekend. They had a thing with his colleagues. She was behind on a project at work. Always plausible. Always delivered in a tone that was pleasant, but somehow just slightly pressured, like a door being held open while someone stood behind it. I noticed that she stopped mentioning her friends. She had a close group of women she had known since college, and they used to come up in conversation all the time. This one's new job, that one's baby, the group chat always going. And then, slowly, quietly, they stopped. When I asked about them, she would say something vague. They had all gotten so busy. People grow apart. She said it like she was reciting something. I noticed that she started deferring to him in small ways that added up. On the phone, if he was in the room, her answers got shorter. She would say, "Let me check with him about that." She would say, "He prefers if I don't commit to things without talking to him first." I said that sounds reasonable for a marriage, and in isolation, any one of those things was reasonable. That is the part I cannot explain to people who have not lived through it. Every brick looks like just a brick until you step back and see the wall. The first time I saw them together after the wedding, about 8 months in, we met at a restaurant halfway between our cities. My daughter had lost weight. Not dramatically, but enough that I saw it when she walked in, and something moved through me fast and uncomfortable before I smoothed it down. She was dressed beautifully. Hair done. She looked, to anyone glancing over, like a happy young woman having lunch with her husband and her mother. He was charming at that lunch. He asked me about my work, my health, my plans for retirement. He refilled my water glass. He touched my daughter's hand when she spoke, and smiled at her in a way that looked like tenderness. But twice she started to say something and he interrupted her, not rudely, just smoothly, redirecting, taking over the sentence and finishing it in a slightly different direction than where she had been heading. And both times she stopped. She did not push back. She did not even seem to register it. She just stopped, like a clock that had learned to stop itself before the alarm. I drove home that evening and sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. I started paying closer attention after that. I started calling more often at unexpected times. Sometimes she answered. Sometimes she did not. When she did, I listened, not just to what she said, but to what she did not say. The pauses, the moments where the sentence changed direction mid-thought. The careful, measured way she described her life, always fine, always good, always wonderful. Every word sitting too perfectly in a row like furniture, arranged for a showing rather than a home that people actually lived in. I called an old colleague of mine around this time, a woman who had specialized in coercive control for most of her career. I did not tell her it was about my daughter. I framed it as a professional consultation. She listened to what I described and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You already know what this is. You are just hoping I will tell you you are wrong." She was right. I did know. And she did not tell me I was wrong. What I did not know yet was how bad it had gotten inside that house. My daughter was protecting me. She told me later. She said she knew if she told me the truth I would act, and she was terrified of what he would do if she gave her a reason. She had already learned, in ways I was not privy to, exactly what he was capable of. He had never raised his hand to her at that point. What he had done was methodical and quiet. He had monitored her phone, not secretly, openly, like it was a reasonable thing, like transparency in a marriage meant she owed him access to every text, every call, every search. He had moved their finances so that her paycheck went into an account he managed, and he gave her a monthly allowance. He had told her which clothes were appropriate and which were not, framing it as caring about how the world saw her. He had slowly, patiently, made her world smaller until the only thing left in it was him and what he approved of. And his father had helped. This is the part that still makes my jaw tighten when I think about it. His father was not in the dark. He was not a bystander who did not know what was happening in his son's marriage. He was counsel. He was cover. When my daughter had once, early on, tearfully told her husband that something felt wrong, that she felt controlled and alone, her husband had brought her to his father's office, and his father had sat across from her and spoken about submission and sanctity and the sacredness of a wife's trust in her husband. He had taken her fear and dressed it in scripture and handed it back to her as a personal failing. She had walked out of that office, believing the problem was her own heart. I did not know any of this yet. What broke it open was a Sunday afternoon in October. I had called my daughter, and she had not answered. I had texted and gotten back a single word, busy. No punctuation, no warmth, nothing. Something about that one cold word at 3 p.m. on a Sunday landed differently than all the other small things. I cannot explain it precisely. I just knew. The way you know in a crisis, past logic, past your own doubt, you just know. I got in my car, and I drove 2 hours to her house. She opened the door, and I saw her face and my training and my composure, and every professional wall I had built over 38 years collapsed completely for about 4 seconds before I rebuilt them. Because I needed them. I needed to be precise. Her left eye was swollen and dark. There was a cut at the corner of her lip that had scabbed over. She was wearing a long-sleeved shirt in October warmth, and she was holding herself slightly to the right, the way a person holds themselves when breathing on one side hurts. She said, "Mom," and her voice broke on that one syllable, like it had been held together with almost nothing for a very long time. He was not there. He had gone to his father's for the afternoon. Of all the things that would become relevant later, that detail that he had gone to his father's matters more than it might seem right now. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I sat with my daughter on her couch, and I held her hand and I let her talk for as long as she needed to talk. And she talked for a long time. About all of it. The monitoring, the allowance, the clothes, the friends she had let go, because it was easier than the questions he asked when she came home. The way his father had told her that a wife who could not keep peace in her own home lacked faith. The first time he had grabbed her arm, and the way she had convinced herself it was not what it was. And then 3 weeks ago, and then last week, and then yesterday, I sat with her and I listened to all of it, and I kept my voice very, very steady. When she was done, I asked her one question. I said, "Do you want to be free of this?" She looked at me like it was a question in a language she had forgotten she once knew, like the possibility of it had been so far outside her available world that she had stopped being able to see it. Then she nodded, slowly at first, and then with everything she had. I said, "Okay." Then I took out my phone. I want to be clear about what I did not do. I did not call anyone to come hurt him. I did not make threats. I was 62 years old, and I had spent my entire life working within systems to help people, and I understood those systems in ways that most people do not. I knew exactly which doors to knock on. The first call I made was to a detective I had worked with on and off for nearly 15 years, a woman who specialized in domestic violence cases and who I had collaborated with many times in my professional life. I told her what I was looking at. I told her what my daughter had just told me. I told her about the father. She told me what to do in the next hour, and I did exactly that. My daughter's injuries were documented that evening by a medical professional. Everything was photographed. Everything was recorded. My daughter made a statement while she still had the courage, and before the fear had time to rebuild its walls around her. The second call I made was to a family attorney. Not just any family attorney. One who had handled cases involving financial abuse and coercive control specifically, and who understood that the money my daughter had earned over 2 years of marriage had been moved and managed in ways that constituted theft. What happened with his father took a little longer, but it came. Because here is what I knew, and what his father did not know that I knew. In my years as a crisis counselor, I had worked with 2 other women who attended his church, women whose marriages had frayed and broken in ways that had never been discussed publicly, women who had sat in that same office and received the same counsel my daughter had. And when word quietly spread, not through gossip, not through malice, but through the kind of careful, documented testimony that attorneys and journalists actually take seriously, his father's carefully constructed reputation began to come apart at the seams. He did not lose everything overnight. That is not how these things work. But he lost enough. His position at the church became untenable within 6 months. The community he had built his authority on began to ask questions he could not answer without incriminating himself further. He had traded his son's accountability for his own reputation, and when that trade was exposed, neither account had anything left in it. My son-in-law was arrested. He was charged. The financial case ran alongside the criminal one. My daughter had her own attorney, her own advocate, her own voice in a process that was finally designed to hear it. She moved in with me for a while. I want to tell you about that time because I think it is the part people do not talk about enough. The after. The recovery. It was not a movie. It was not a sudden transformation. Some mornings she woke up and she was full of anger, which was healthy and right, and I let her be angry without trying to resolve it. Some mornings she woke up and she missed him. Not him exactly the person she had believed he was, before she fully understood what she was living in. That grief was real too, and I did not try to take it from her. We cooked together. We watched television together. We went to church together. A different church, one where the pastor spoke about a woman's worth in a way that made my daughter cry the first time she heard it, the good kind of crying, the kind that means something broken inside you is starting to recognize itself again. She started running, not because I told her to, but because one morning she just laced up her shoes and went. She ran 4 blocks. The next week she ran 8. By spring she was running 3 miles every morning, and I would watch her come back through the door with her cheeks flushed and her breathing hard, and that particular expression on her face, not happiness exactly, not yet, but something more fundamental than happiness, something like the memory of who she was before someone spent 2 years convincing her she was nothing. She is her own woman now. She has her own account, her own apartment, her own friends, who she sees when she wants to and calls when she needs to. She calls me on Sundays and she never misses the call. I am 63 years old. I have seen a great many things in my work and in my life, and I have made peace with the fact that I cannot fix everything, cannot reach everyone, cannot always act in time. But I am grateful. I am deeply and specifically grateful that when my daughter needed me to see her clearly, I was not so far inside my own hope that I could not see what was actually there. Because hope is a gift, and hope is also a place you can hide when looking directly at the truth feels like more than you can bear. If you are watching this, and something in this story feels familiar, not like a movie, but like your own kitchen, your own phone, your own voice, getting smaller in your own house, I want you to hear me. You do not have to wait for it to become undeniable before you reach out to someone. You do not have to protect anyone from the truth of what is happening to you. The people who love you, the ones worth keeping, They would rather know. And if you are a mother, or a sister, or a friend, and you have a quiet feeling about someone you love, trust that feeling. Do not wait for proof you can photograph. The proof comes later. What matters is the conversation you start today. My daughter is well. That is what I hold when the harder memories find me in the middle of the night. She is well. She is running. She is awake in her own life, in a way I was not sure, in some of those long, dark months, I would ever see again. I am grateful for every single ordinary Sunday phone call. I want to ask you something before you go. I have shared something real with you today, and I believe in this community. What is one thing in this story that stayed with you? What is one thing you are going to carry with you after this? Leave it in the comments below. I read every one. And tell me what city you are watching from. This community spans so many places, and every time I see where you are all watching from, I am reminded of why these stories need to be told. You are not alone. None of us are alone. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. I will see you in the next one.